Hello everybody, you're looking at recently released footage of Israeli soldiers raiding Hezbollah's tunnels and arms caches in southern Lebanon. These raids began weeks ago, below radar or the watching eyes of either Israel's or the world's media outlets, until morphing into an all-out invasion of Lebanon yesterday to further Israel's aim of destroying Hezbollah's network of tunnels and fortified positions along its frontier with Israel. Much to Israel's chagrin and anger, the United States leaks several of the details of this imminent Israeli operation in its attempt to limit both Israel's aims and actions. The Biden administration's nearly year-long attempts to frustrate Israel from realizing its war aim of total victory over those responsible for the October 7 mega terror attack on Israel is unfortunately an integral part of the story of this war. In this video, I'm going to tell the story of how we got to this point. On October 10, 2023, only 3 days after Hamas's brutal terror attack on Israel, and just 2 days after Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah decided to join the fray by launching daily rocket assaults on Israel, Israel's intelligence chiefs approached Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a plan to take out Nasrallah, whose whereabouts were well known. Netanyahu in turn raised the issue with the Biden administration, which immediately shot down the suggestion in accordance with its own chief war aim: to prevent Israel's war with Hamas from spreading into a regional war between Israel, Iran, and the rest of Iran's proxies at all costs. Accordingly, Israel shelved the assassination of Nasrallah and turned its attention to planning a ground assault against Hamas in Gaza. This episode would mark the beginning of a growing divergence between the Biden administration's war aims and Israel's. For the next 11 months, while the bulk of Israel's forces were engaged in Gaza, Hezbollah and Israel exchanged fire daily. This exchange of fire was governed by a certain mutual understanding. Hezbollah would limit its rocket salvos to Israel's northern frontier with Lebanon and at least claim to avoid the intentional targeting of Israel's civilian population. And for its part, Israel would limit its responses to targeting Hezbollah's military infrastructure and personnel. Neither side would target the other's metropolises, Tel Aviv in Israel or Beirut in Lebanon. This understanding would come to an end starting this past summer when Hezbollah increased the number of rockets it fired and killed a dozen youth belonging to Israel's Druze community on the Golan Heights. These events would cause Israel to finally enact a plan, a sequence of events planned almost 2 decades ago. Back in 2006, Hezbollah's Nasrallah ordered an assault along the border with Israel, in which his organization ambushed an Israeli patrol and kidnapped 3 of its soldiers. Israel's prime minister at the time, Ehud Olmert, launched a war to both regain these soldiers and deter Hezbollah from ever thinking of doing such a thing again. The war lasted 34 days, during which time America's President George W. Bush practically gave Israel a blank check to do whatever Israel needed to do in order to win the war. But Israel's Olmert rushed into the war without adequate intelligence, assets, or the tactics or training to win. Thus, the war ended at best as a stalemate, which Nasrallah exploited to declare victory. Overnight, Nasrallah became the darling of the Arab and Muslim worlds, for his organization chased Israel out of Lebanon, which it had been occupying since 1982, and could now at least claim a victory by merely not being defeated by Israel, something that no Arab country managed to accomplish in its wars with Israel since the country's establishment in 1948. It was in the immediate aftermath of this disappointing conclusion of Israel's first war with Hezbollah that Israel went to work in order to make sure that in round two, which was sure to come at some future date, Israel would deliver a decisive knockout that no one would be able to dispute. Israel's foreign intelligence agency, the Mossad, which translates simply as the Institute, would get busy establishing front or shell companies throughout Europe, most notably in Hungary, which would play a pivotal role in delivering this knockout some 15 years in the future. These companies would front as tech and telecommunication firms. Israel's Unit 8200, the country's signals intelligence and cyber attacking unit, roughly the equivalent of America's NSA, would build cutting-edge tools to better intercept Hezbollah's cell phones and other communications. At the same time, Israel would fly stealthy drones and direct the eyes of its most advanced satellites on Lebanon in order to continually spy on Hezbollah's assets and positions, and even document minor changes to structures and homes that might betray a weapons cache or tunnel being dug for future assaults on Israel. Hezbollah, for its part, would work closely with its patron, Iran, in order to improve its ability to ferret out Israeli spies and detect attempts by Israel to intercept the organization's communications network. But as we will see, Hezbollah got outfoxed by an Israeli female Mossad agent who is said to not have yet reached the age of 30 years old. Israel's long game and meticulous planning would begin to bear fruit this past July, while several of us were enjoying fellowship together on a cruise through the Aegean Sea, which, on the evening of July 30th, Israel killed Hezbollah's military chief of staff, Fuad Shukr, who had received a phone call asking him to go from his office on the second floor of the building housing both his office and residence to the seventh floor where he made his home. Shortly after entering his home, he was dispatched by an Israeli airstrike on that floor. A few hours later, Hamas's own leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was himself dispatched in the heart of Tehran's most guarded compound, not by an airstrike, but by a bomb smuggled into an apartment reserved for visits by the highest-ranking dignitaries and friends of the Ayatollahs. Then, on September 8th, Israeli special forces are said to have conducted one of Israel's most daring raids in the country's long history of daring raids. Teams of commandos rappelled down ropes from helicopters equipped with detailed maps of one of Syria's most secret and guarded installations, an underground factory that manufactures ballistic missiles on behalf of Iran and its most powerful proxy, Hezbollah, rigged the structure with timed explosives, and boarded the helicopters for their departure back to Israel all within 15 minutes of their arrival. But the event that most would agree kicked off this cascade of events that led to Hassan Nasrallah's death and brought us to this present moment is undoubtedly the pager attack, which was unprecedented in both its scope and success. The origin of that success was in those front or shadow companies set up nearly 15 years ago. While many have argued that Israel inserted itself into the supply chain of those pagers, it would likely be more accurately described as Israel's Mossad comprising the whole supply chain, from the setting up of their shadow companies in Europe to the production of thousands of pagers that included the explosive components from the get-go, to the delivery of those pagers into the hands of Hezbollah beginning roughly 5 months before Israel sent a signal that exploded the pagers either in the pockets or hands of thousands of individual Hezbollah members. And speaking of that signal, it has been divulged to various Israeli media outlets that a single Israeli female Mossad agent, not yet 30 years of age, was responsible for the finer details of these detonations. While they seem to have been detonated en masse simultaneously, It is being reported in Israel that the Mossad was aware of the particular circumstances in real time of each individual pager's whereabouts and status, that the Israelis had inserted the capability within each pager to communicate in the other direction to the Mossad, and not just from the Mossad in the form of the detonating signal. Thus, Israel was aware of the real-time status and location of each particular pager. And we are being told that a single young female Mossad agent still in her 20s was responsible for all this. In all events, this widespread explosion of pagers on the persons of Hezbollah's members is said by Hezbollah itself to have taken out roughly 1,500 of its mid-ranking members. But if an alleged Saudi intercept of an internal Hezbollah memo following the pager explosions is authentic, then the real death toll of these explosions exacted from Hezbollah something like 1,000 dead and thousands more removed from the terror organization's front lines than they admit to. Now, while Hezbollah was still reeling from this devastating pager attack, which was followed up the next day by exploding walkie-talkies, Israel didn't let up in its attacks. For Israel had been tracking the comings and goings of one Ibrahim Akil, the head of Hezbollah's special operations, and its most elite unit, the Radwan Force, as he traveled to and fro between Beirut and Lebanon's southern frontier with Israel, supervising the force's preparations for its own October 7th styled invasion of northern Israel. On September 20th, he was killed by an Israeli airstrike shortly after walking into an apartment building in Beirut and heading to a war room in which the rest of the Radwan force's commanders were assembled, thus taking them all out as well. From the killing of Akil to the killing of Nasrallah a week later, Israel so thinned out Hezbollah's senior ranks that Nasrallah was left virtually alone. No one believed that Israel would dare take Nasrallah himself out. In fact, behind the scenes, Israel was negotiating with him via intermediaries in order to come to some kind of ceasefire agreement. Also, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was scheduled to depart to New York in order to deliver a speech before the UN's General Assembly. Both these negotiations and Netanyahu's departure from the region caused Nasrallah to feel a false sense of security, so much so that he convened a meeting with his remaining commanders and the Iranian general responsible for Hezbollah in a command bunker that Israel's eyes had been on for weeks. Unbeknownst to Nasrallah, a couple days before Netanyahu's departure to New York, the Israeli War Cabinet had approved plans to assassinate him and consecrated Netanyahu and his defense minister to take Nasrallah out. The order to do so would come from Netanyahu by telephone just minutes before he ascended the stairs to a podium at the UN from where he would address the world on live television. While Netanyahu was delivering his speech, Israeli fighter jets took off for Beirut, which is only a few minutes' flight from Israel, and dropped nearly 80 bunker-busting bombs on Nasrallah's bunker, killing him and all the remaining participants in the meeting, including the Iranian general. Unlike the plot to kill Nasrallah the year before, with which I began the story, this time the Israelis did not inform the Biden administration in advance, leaving the administration embittered and feeling somewhat vindictive. For yesterday, the American administration leaked details of Israel's imminent ground invasion of Lebanon, concerning which Israel did notify the American administration in advance. As for Nasrallah, his lifeless body was discovered entirely intact a couple of days after the attack on his bunker. It's being reported that he died from suffocation under tons of debris of what used to be his compound. Well, that's the story of how we got to this point in the war. Stay tuned for future chapters of this unfolding saga that are still to be written.